They said the family was blessed. Acres of land, oil money beneath their fields, and a name that carried weight through the Appalachian hills. But what they didn't tell outsiders, what they never wrote down, was that the blessing came with a bargain. For generations, they refused to marry outsiders. Cousins wed cousins. Nieces were promised to uncles, and every wedding photo told the same silent story, faces growing less familiar, less human, as the years went on. Hello everyone, before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Alright, now let's go back to the story. By the time the last child was born, even the midwife, an old woman who'd seen death up close, ran screaming from the room. This story isn't from some distant century. It's not buried in medieval Europe. It happened right here, in America's heartland, in a town where everyone knew everyone's name and where the word family meant something far more literal than you'd want to imagine. In the beginning, the family name stood for power and tradition. They were the ones who built the church, who owned the mill, who controlled the flow of money through the valley. They believed that keeping the blood pure kept the blessing alive. But purity is a fragile illusion, and the more they tried to preserve it, the more they twisted what it meant to be human. Neighbors started whispering. They said the children never looked right. Eyes too close together, fingers fused, minds that never quite developed past infancy. But because the family had money, people turned away. Doctors were paid off. Records vanished. And with every generation, the truth became harder to hide. There's one photograph, faded, nearly eaten through by time, that shows the last 5 generations lined up in front of their homestead. The first men look proud, strong, almost regal. But as your eyes move to the end of the line, you see something else. Something that shouldn't exist. A figure standing small and twisted at the edge, with eyes like a reflection in broken glass. That was the final child, the one born after nearly a century of cousin marriages. The one whose birth marked the end of the family name. And tonight, we're going to uncover what really happened behind those doors. How obsession with purity became a descent into something unspeakable. Because some family trees don't just branch, they rot from within. Long before the final child was born, there was a man named Caesar, the patriarch who planted both the family's fortune and its curse. He arrived in the early 1800s, claiming land no one else wanted. Rocky, remote, cut off from the nearest town by 30 miles of wilderness. To most, it was isolation. To him, it was safety. A place to build his dynasty, untouched by the corruption of outsiders. Silas believed blood was sacred. He preached that the closer the kin, the stronger the bond. That outsiders carried weakness, sin, and sickness of the soul. He told his children to marry of their own. And they did, over and over again. At first, no one questioned him. The crops grew, livestock thrived, and the family became the wealthiest in 3 counties. But the price came quietly, hidden in the next generation. Babies born sickly, children who didn't speak, limbs that twisted the wrong way. Silas called it the Lord's test. But the midwives whispered a different word. Curse. As the decades passed, the Arv name became both legend and warning. Travelers told stories of strange lights in the woods near the old estate, of voices echoing from the cellar at night. Locals claimed you could hear weeping from beneath the earth, where family members who didn't come out right were said to be buried in unmarked graves. The family's wealth bought silence. Priests were paid to bless the land, doctors to falsify birth certificates, undertakers to say nothing. And so the bloodline continued, cousins marrying cousins, the same names repeating in every record like an echo that refused to die. But there was one generation, one pair of siblings, that changed everything. They weren't content to hide. They wanted to perfect the family legacy. The boy, Thomas, believed he could undo the deformities through what he called blood refinement. The girl, Miriam, followed him out of devotion and fear. Together, they would conceive a child who would either redeem the family or end it forever. No one knows exactly what happened in that house during the winter of 1927. The curtains stayed drawn for months. The chimney smoked day and night. But when the door finally opened again, Thomas was gone, and Miriam was carrying a child. That child would become the final heir, and when it was born, the doctor refused to write a birth certificate. He said it wasn't right to give a human name to what he'd seen. The winter of 1928 was the coldest the valley had seen in decades. Snow buried the roads, ice sealed the windows, and even the river froze thick enough to walk across. It was during that silence, when the world seemed held between life and death, that Miriam went into labor. There was no hospital for miles. The family didn't trust outsiders anyway. They sent for a midwife, a woman named Hattie Graves, who delivered more babies than she could count. When she arrived, the house was dark except for a single lantern in the hallway. She said the air smelled of iron and smoke. Every door was locked except the one leading to Miriam's room. What happened next, Hattie never fully wrote down, but years later, before her own death, she told a priest what she remembered. She said the screams weren't like any she'd heard before. Not human, not animal. It was as if the house itself was crying out. When the baby came, she wrapped it quickly in a blanket and turned away. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then one of the older women stepped forward, peeled back the cloth, and gasped. The child's skin was translucent, veins blue like river lines beneath the surface. Its face was asymmetrical, jaw too small for the mouth it held. The eyes opened, wide, unblinking, the color of glass. It didn't cry, didn't move, just stared. Hattie said she wanted to run, but Miriam reached for the child with trembling hands, whispering, "He's perfect. He's ours." That night, the snow outside turned to freezing rain, and by morning the midwife was gone. She packed her things, walked 6 miles to the next town, and never returned. When people asked why, she only said one thing: "No one should have seen what I saw that night." For months, no one saw the baby again. Curtains stayed drawn. Food was left at the porch, money slipped into envelopes. And when the church came to offer baptism, the door was never answered. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said the child didn't live past its first year. Others said it grew slowly but wrong, limbs bending in ways that defied anatomy, voice-forming sounds no one could understand. But there's one account, buried in a forgotten newspaper clipping from 1933, that speaks of a young heir of the R estate, briefly seen standing by the gate during a flood. The reporter described the figure as fragile, with eyes that reflected light like an animal's. No name was given, only a warning that some bloodlines were never meant to continue. After the birth, the Arv estate became a fortress of silence. The great house that once hosted summer gatherings and family feasts turned inward, its shutters nailed shut, its gardens overgrown. No one was allowed inside. Even the postman left letters at the edge of the long dirt road, never daring to walk up to the porch. Miriam raised the child alone, though phrasing might not be the right word. The townsfolk said they could hear lullabies late at night, soft, desperate songs drifting from an upstairs window. Other times there were screams. Some nights the lamp stayed lit until dawn, and others, there was nothing but blackness. When the boy was about 5, the family stopped attending church. The local pastor came once to visit, offering prayers and comfort. He returned pale, shaking, muttering that the child was touched, but not by God. He refused to say more. The family's wealth began to crumble soon after. Fields went barren, livestock died without cause, and their once golden fortune turned to debt. But Miriam refused to leave. She said the house was their only protection, that if she took her son beyond its walls he wouldn't survive, or worse, the world wouldn't survive him. Visitors described seeing strange things from the road, silhouettes moving behind the curtains long after the lights went out, shadows that didn't match the human form. One traveler, a traveling salesman who broke down nearby, later claimed he was invited in for supper by Miriam herself. He said she looked hollow, her skin thin, her smile strained like a crack in glass. The boy, he said, sat silently at the table, didn't eat, didn't blink, just stared at him with those mirrored eyes. When the man left, he never told anyone exactly what he saw in that house, only that the boy made a sound, something between a laugh and a gasp, like hearing an echo of your own voice from inside a cave. By 1942, the house was nearly forgotten. The war had taken the young men, the town had moved on, and the R name had become little more than a whisper told to frighten children. But the truth was the bloodline hadn't died, not yet, because one night a fire broke out in the old estate. The blaze burned for hours, visible for miles, and when it was finally over, there was nothing left but stone and smoke. They found Miriam's body in the parlor, clutching something to her chest. A small, unburned bundle wrapped in a quilt. The rescuers opened it carefully, expecting to find a child's remains, but it was empty. The boy was gone. After the fire, the town wanted to forget. They called it an accident, said the old house was bound to burn eventually. But there were no burn marks on the ground around the parlor, no trail of oil, no lightning that night. Only silence, a silence that felt intentional. The sheriff organized a search, combing the woods for miles. They found footprints, small ones leading down toward the river, but halfway there, the trail stopped. Just stopped. As if the boy had vanished into thin air. No body, no bones, no scraps of cloth. For weeks, people said they heard things at night, knocks on doors with no one standing outside. Animal noises that weren't quite right once. A farmer claimed he saw a figure crawling along the tree line at dawn, pale, limping, moving on all fours. When he called out, it froze, turned its head in a way that no neck should, and then fled into the fog. After that, no one went near the old property again. But even as time moved on, the bloodline didn't disappear completely. Because before her death, Miriam had written letters, hidden in the walls of the estate and found decades later during a demolition project. They were addressed to Thomas, her brother, the one who vanished before the child's birth. In those letters, her words are almost unreadable, trembling and desperate. She writes of the baby's strength, of how quickly it learned to mimic her voice, how it could repeat words it had only heard once. Then the tone changes. She says it began speaking in voices that weren't hers. She writes, "He knows things I never told him. He remembers things I never lived." A one letter ends with a single line, "Thomas, if this is what perfection looks like, then I fear what comes after." It's believed those letters were the last traces of the R family. The rest of the estate was swallowed by forest, the graves unmarked, the name erased from records by the 1950s. But people in the valley still tell stories. They say sometimes, on cold nights, you can hear humming from the woods, the same lullaby Miriam sang. Some even claim the last hare didn't die at all, that he grew, changed, learned to move among us. And every once in a while, a child is born in that county with eyes the color of glass. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you have broken the chain or kept it alive out of loyalty? Decades passed. The story of the Arf family faded from memory, becoming just another ghost tale whispered at campfires. But in 1971, a local historian named Arthur Bell began researching isolated bloodlines across Appalachia. He stumbled upon fragments, tax ledgers, burned birth records, missing census pages, all pointing to a family that officially ceased to exist in 1942. That phrase, cease to exist, haunted him. Families don't just disappear. Bell followed the paper trail to the ruins of the Arv estate. The woods had reclaimed everything. Only a few stones remained, swallowed by moss and vines. But in the cellar, beneath layers of debris and ash, he found a metal trunk sealed shut with rusted locks. Inside were the letters Miriam had written and something else. A journal, bound in leather, initials burned into the cover. T.R. Thomas R., the brother who vanished before the fire. The journal is now lost to time, but the fragments Bell copied before his mysterious death survive. In one entry, Thomas writes about purification through recurrence, a belief that the same blood reborn within itself could evolve beyond humanity. He describes the human form as temporary, the mind as vessel that learns through repetition. He believed their family could create something beyond human, something eternal. In later pages, his tone shifts. He writes that Miriam is changing, that her skin no longer burns in sunlight, that the child she carries listens even before birth. He claims the baby speaks to him in dreams, calling him father. Bell shared his findings with only one colleague before he disappeared, a professor at a small college in Kentucky. That professor claimed Bell showed him photographs found in the trunk, one of Miriam holding an infant wrapped in cloth and another torn down the middle, showing a child's shadow cast on a wall, its shape not quite right. 2 weeks later, Arthur Bell's car was found overturned on a back road near the old property line. His notes were missing. The police said it was an accident, but locals remembered something different. That night, the air filled with the smell of iron and smoke again, just like it had the night the house burned. And in his last recorded interview, Bell said one thing before the tape cut off, his voice trembling, barely a whisper. "It's still here. The blood never left. It just changed its face. Today, the land where they are, estate once stood as unrecognizable. The woods have reclaimed it, the foundation buried beneath roots that twist like veins through the soil. Most people drive past without noticing, but locals, old ones, the kind who still remember, avoid that road entirely. They say strange things still happen there. Dead animals found arranged in perfect circles, tracks in the mud that start with human footprints and end in something else. In the county archive, there's one last entry connected to the family, dated 1989. A police report filed after a hiker went missing near the old property line. His camera was found weeks later, waterlogged, film mostly destroyed, but a few frames survived. The first few show the woods, thick with fog, then a shape in the distance, small, hunched, watching. The final image is almost too dark to make out, but if you brighten it, you can see eyes. Wide, glassy, reflecting the flash. Eyes that don't belong to any known animal. After that case, the sheriff's department stopped responding to calls from that area. They said it was cursed land, ancestrally tainted, a place that feeds on those who look too closely. Some say that's superstition, but others believe the bloodline never truly ended, that the child, whatever it became, escaped into the hills and learned to hide among us. Maybe it bred again. Maybe the line continued, diluted, invisible now among normal people. Every few years, stories surface of children born in nearby towns, silent, pale, born with strange bone structures or uncanny mimicry abilities. Doctors chalk it up to coincidence, mutation, chance. But the locals they remember, they whisper about the curse, about a bloodline too stubborn to die, too unnatural to disappear. Maybe that's why no map shows the old road anymore, why no one can find the exact coordinates of where the estate once stood. Because some things, some histories, don't want to be found. And yet, if you stand in the valley at night, when the air is cold and still, you might hear something faint through the trees, a voice, high, thin, humming an old lullaby. The same one Miriam sang nearly a century ago. They say if you answer it, even by accident, you'll dream of a house on fire. You'll see faces you don't recognize. People who look almost human, but not quite. And when you wake up, you'll have ash under your fingernails. Maybe it's just folklore. Maybe it's just guilt buried deep in the soil. Or maybe the blood remembers, and it's waiting for someone to call it home again. Would you like me to add an outro narration in the same haunting tone to close the video and transition to the end screen? I like how Eyes of the Past does, with reflective closing lines and a chilling final hook.